The sound of quiet weeping drifting through the evening air stopped Harrison Irons dead in his tracks outside the Silver Star Saloon in Silverton, Colorado, and he knew in that instant that walking away would haunt him forever. It was August 1878, and the mountain town had settled into its usual Friday evening rhythm. Piano music and laughter spilled from the saloon's swinging doors while miners and cowboys celebrated the end of another brutal week. Harrison had been heading inside himself after a long day working cattle on the Henderson ranch when he heard that sound, soft and broken, coming from the narrow alley beside the building. He hesitated only a moment before turning toward the sound. The woman sat on a wooden crate, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. She wore a simple blue calico dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair had fallen loose from its pins. Harrison removed his hat and approached slowly, his boots scuffing the dirt to announce his presence. "Madam," his voice was gentle, barely audible above the noise from the saloon. "Are you hurt?" The woman's head snapped up, and even in the dim light of the lanterns hanging along the street, Harrison could see her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked young, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Fear flashed across her face as she scrambled to her feet, wiping frantically at her tears. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice hoarse. "Please just go about your business." Harrison stayed where he was, turning his hat over in his hands. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you don't sound fine." "I don't mean to intrude, but if someone's hurt you or you're in some kind of trouble, maybe I can help." The woman laughed, but it was a bitter sound without any real humor. "Unless you can turn back time or magic up $300, I don't think there's anything anyone can do." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and she turned away from him, pressing her hand against the rough wooden wall of the saloon. Harrison took a careful step closer. "That's a lot of money. What do you need it for, if you don't mind my asking?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Harrison was about to excuse himself and leave her in peace when she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Zelda Zimmerman. My father died 3 weeks ago. He owned the general store on Main Street, but he had debts I didn't know about. The bank is demanding payment, and if I can't come up with the money by Monday, they're taking the store. It's all I have left of him. It's my home, my livelihood, everything." Harrison absorbed this information, his mind working through the problem. He knew Zimmerman's general store well. Everyone in Silverton did. It was one of the oldest businesses in town, established back when Silverton was little more than a mining camp. "I'm sorry about your father," he said sincerely. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone." Zelda turned back to face him, studying him properly for the first time. He was tall and lean, with kind brown eyes and sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days outdoors. There was something steady about him, something that made her want to trust him despite having never seen him before. "You're kind to listen," she said softly. "Most people in this town have already written me off. A woman alone trying to run a business. They think it's foolish. They think I should just let the bank take it and find work as a seamstress or a cook or—" She trailed off, her cheeks coloring slightly. Harrison understood what she wasn't saying. Options for single women in frontier towns were often limited and sometimes degrading. He felt a surge of protectiveness toward this woman he'd just met. "How much time do you have?" he asked. "Until Monday morning. The banker, Mr. Carson, has made it very clear he won't grant any more extensions." Harrison thought for a moment. "Would you do something for me? Would you not give up just yet? Go home, get some rest, and meet me tomorrow morning at the store. 8 o'clock. Zelda's eyes widened. "Why? What are you planning?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Harrison admitted with a small smile. but I know a few things about this town and the people in it. Maybe between the two of us we can figure something out." "I don't even know your name," Zelda said, but there was a spark of something in her eyes now, something that looked almost like hope. "Harrison Irons. I work at the Henderson Ranch, been in Silverton about 5 years now." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Zelda took it. Her hand was small and work-roughened, and Harrison held it gently for just a moment before releasing it. "Why would you help me?" Zelda asked. "You don't know me at all." Harrison settled his hat back on his head. "My mother used to say that kindness doesn't need a reason, but if you want one, I'll give you this. When I first came to Colorado, I was broke and desperate. A man named Thomas Henderson gave me a job when no one else would, and it changed my life. I figure I owe it to the world to pass that kind of help along when I can." Zelda felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't entirely from despair. "Thank you, Mr. Irons." "Harrison," he corrected gently. "And don't thank me yet. We haven't solved anything, but we'll try. That's all we can do." After Zelda promised to meet him the next morning and departed for her home above the store, Harrison didn't go into the saloon after all. Instead, he walked through the lamplit streets of Silverton, his mind churning with possibilities. $300 was more money than most folks in town saw in a year. He had some savings, about $60 he'd been putting away to maybe buy some land of his own someday, but it wasn't nearly enough. The Henderson ranch house sat at the edge of town, a sprawling structure that Thomas Henderson had built with his own hands 20 years ago. Harrison found his employer on the front porch, smoking a pipe and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Evening, Harrison," Thomas said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "You look troubled." Harrison sat down and told Thomas everything. The older man listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful in the lamplight. "I remember old Marcus Zimmerman," Thomas said when Harrison finished. "Good man, honest businessman. I knew his health was failing, but I didn't realize he'd left such debts. And the daughter, you say she's trying to keep the store running. She is. And from what I've heard around town, she's done a fair job of it these past weeks, considering everything." Thomas puffed on his pipe. "Carson at the bank is a hard man. He doesn't care much for people, just numbers in his ledgers. I know. That's why I'm trying to figure out how to help." Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was thinking maybe we could organize something, a collection from the townspeople or maybe some kind of benefit." "In 2 days," Thomas shook his head. "That's not much time. And while people in Silverton can be generous, $300 is asking a lot." They sat in silence for a while, the night settling around them with the sound of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. "Tell you what," Thomas finally said, "I'll contribute $50. Zimmerman sold me supplies for years at fair prices, never tried to cheat me. I can spare it." Harrison felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas. That's generous. And I'll come with you tomorrow morning. Maybe if we put our heads together with the girl, we can come up with something." When Harrison arrived at the general store the next morning, he found Zelda already inside, sweeping the floor even though it looked perfectly clean. She wore a different dress today, a faded green one, and she'd fixed her hair into a neat bun. The morning light streaming through the store's front windows caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "Good morning," he said, and she turned, a tentative smile on her face. "Good morning, Harrison. I have to confess, I half thought I'd dreamed our conversation last night." It seemed too good to be true, someone offering to help. Before Harrison could respond, Thomas Henderson walked in, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. Zelda's eyes widened as she recognized one of the most prosperous ranchers in the area. "Miss Zimmerman," Thomas said, removing his hat. I'm Thomas Henderson. Harrison here told me about your situation, and I want to help if I can. For the next hour, they went over everything. Zelda showed them her father's ledgers, which revealed the extent of the problem. Marcus Zimmerman had borrowed money to expand his inventory, hoping to cash in on the mining boom. But then several of his biggest customers had left town when their claims dried up. He'd been slowly paying down the debt when he'd taken sick, and the medical bills had consumed what little reserves he'd had left. "The store is sound," Thomas said, studying the books. "You've actually managed to turn a small profit these past 3 weeks. If Carson wasn't such a snake, he'd see that giving you time would be the smart business move. You'd pay him back eventually with interest." "I've tried to explain that to him," Zelda said, frustration evident in her voice. "He won't listen. He says business is business and emotions have no place in it." Harrison had been walking around the store, looking at the shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to mining equipment to bolts of fabric. An idea was forming in his mind. "What if we had a sale?" he said suddenly. "A big one. We could spread the word today, get people in here tomorrow, Sunday, mark everything down to cost or just slightly above. We wouldn't make much profit, but we'd generate cash quickly." Zelda bit her lip. "But then I'd have no inventory to sell once the debt was paid." "We'll solve that problem once we get to it," Thomas said. "First priority is keeping the bank from taking the property. Harrison's idea has merit, but we'd need to get word out fast and far. Silverton's not that big, and most folks already have what they need." "What about the mining camps?" Harrison suggested. "There are at least 3 within riding distance. Miners always need supplies and they're paid now since it's month end. If we could get word to them, promise prices they won't find anywhere else, they might come." Zelda's face brightened. "My father used to supply several of those camps. They know the store's reputation." They quickly formed a plan. Thomas would ride to the largest camp, the Lucky Strike, about 10 miles north. Harrison would take the Prosperity camp to the west. Zelda would spread word in Silverton itself and prepare the store for a massive influx of customers. Before they left, Harrison turned to Zelda. "This might not work. You need to know that." "I do know," she said quietly. "But it's more than I had yesterday, which was nothing at all." "Thank you both." As Harrison rode toward the Prosperity mining camp, he found himself thinking about Zelda more than he probably should. There was something about her that drew him in. She wasn't the prettiest woman he'd ever seen, but there was a strength in her eyes, a determination that he admired. And when she'd smiled that morning, really smiled, it had lit up her whole face. He shook his head at himself. This wasn't the time for such thoughts. She was in trouble and needed help, not some cowboy developing feelings for her. The Prosperity camp was a rough collection of tents and hastily built shacks clinging to the mountainside. Harrison knew the foreman, a grizzled veteran named Pete who'd been mining since before the Civil War. "A sale, you say?" Pete scratched his beard, considering. "The boys have been grumbling about prices at the company store. If you're saying Zimmerman's will beat those prices, you'll have customers." "Everything at cost or just above," Harrison confirmed. "Tomorrow only, starting at dawn." Pete nodded slowly. "I'll pass the word. And Harrison, I was sorry to hear about old Marcus. He was a good man. Glad to see someone's looking out for his daughter." By the time Harrison returned to Silverton late that afternoon, the town was buzzing with news of the sale. Zelda had spent the day preparing, marking prices and organizing stock. She looked exhausted but determined. "Thomas got back an hour ago," she told Harrison. "He said the Lucky Strike miners are definitely coming." "How did you do?" "Same." Pete's spreading the word. "We should have a good crowd tomorrow." Zelda pressed her hand to her chest. "I can hardly believe this is happening. When I woke up yesterday, I thought my world was ending. Now I have a chance." Harrison wanted to say something reassuring, but he was distracted by how the evening light made her eyes look more green than brown. He cleared his throat. "You'll need help tomorrow, managing that many customers." "I was hoping you might stay," Zelda said, then blushed. "If you can spare the time, I don't want to presume." "I'll be here," Harrison assured her. "Thomas, too. We'll get through this together." Sunday dawned clear and cool, perfect for traveling. True to Pete's word, miners from the Prosperity Camp began arriving just after sunrise, followed shortly by men from the Lucky Strike. The general store, usually quiet on Sunday mornings, became a hive of activity. Zelda worked tirelessly, helping customers, calculating purchases, wrapping goods. Harrison and Thomas did what they could, fetching items from high shelves, carrying heavy sacks of flour and sugar, keeping the crowd organized. By noon, Zelda's cash box was filling up. By evening, it was overflowing. When the last customer finally left as the sun was setting, the three of them collapsed onto chairs in exhausted silence. "I'm afraid to count it," Zelda finally said. "What if it's not enough?" "Only one way to find out," Thomas said gently. They counted 3 times to be sure. The total was $248.70. Zelda's face fell. "We're still more than $50 short." Harrison's heart sank. They'd worked so hard and it still wasn't enough. He saw tears beginning to form in Zelda's eyes again, and he couldn't bear it. "I have $60 saved," he said. "It's yours." "Harrison, no," Zelda protested. "That's your money, your future." "It's just money," he said, though the words cost him. That $60 represented years of careful saving, of doing without. But looking at Zelda's face, he knew he'd make the same choice again. "My future will still be there next year, the year after. Your store needs it now." "I'll add another 50, Thomas said. "That'll put you over the top with a little to spare." Tears were streaming down Zelda's face now, but she was smiling. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you both." "You'll rebuild your inventory and keep running the store," Thomas said. "You'll provide this town with honest service like your father did. That's payment enough." Harrison and Zelda arrived at the bank first thing Monday morning. Mr. Carson, a thin man with cold eyes and a perpetual frown, looked surprised to see them. "Miss Zimmerman," he said with barely concealed condescension, "I trust you're here to discuss the terms of foreclosure." "Actually, I'm here to pay my debt," Zelda said, and Harrison heard the steel in her voice. She placed a cloth bag heavy with coins on Carson's desk. $300, as agreed. I'd like a receipt, please, and the deed to the property returned to me." Carson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He clearly hadn't expected this. Slowly, he counted the money, recounted it, then counted it a third time. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he wrote out a receipt and retrieved the deed from his files. "The debt is satisfied," he said stiffly, handing over the papers. Outside the bank, Zelda clutched the deed to her chest and let out a laugh that was half sob. "I can't believe it. It's really over. The store is safe." Harrison felt his own relief wash over him. "You did it. You saved your father's legacy." Zelda turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart beat faster. "I didn't do it alone. Harrison, you gave up your savings for me, for a stranger. I don't understand why." He met her eyes, and the honest answer came out before he could stop it. "Maybe you weren't a stranger. Maybe the moment I heard you crying, I felt like I needed to help, like it mattered more than anything." The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken things. Zelda took a step closer to him. "I'd like to pay you back," she said softly. "Every penny, I promise. But that's not all. Harrison, would you allow me to cook you dinner tonight as a thank you?" Harrison knew he should probably decline. He'd already gotten more involved in this woman's life than was wise, but looking at her hopeful face, he found he couldn't say no. "I'd like that," he said. That evening, Harrison washed up and put on his best shirt before heading to the apartment above the general store. He'd been in the store dozens of times, but never upstairs where Zelda lived. She greeted him at the door wearing a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Harrison thought she looked beautiful. The apartment was small but cozy. Zelda had set the table with care, using what Harrison suspected was her mother's good china. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. "I hope you're hungry," she said, a nervous edge to her voice. "I'm not sure how much cowboys eat." "I could eat a horse," Harrison joked, then added quickly, "but chicken smells much better." They both laughed and some of the tension eased. As they ate, they talked. Really talked. Harrison learned that Zelda's mother had died when she was 12, and she'd been helping her father run the store ever since. She'd learned to keep books, manage inventory, and deal with difficult customers. She loved to read, especially adventure novels, though she'd had little time for it lately. Zelda learned that Harrison had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. His father had died in the war, and his mother had struggled to keep the farm going. When he was 18, Harrison had struck out on his own, working his way west through various jobs until he'd landed in Silverton. He'd never been married, never even come close. "Why not?" Zelda asked, genuinely curious. "You're a good man. Surely there have been women interested." Harrison shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I suppose I never found the right person, someone who understood what it meant to work hard to build something, someone who didn't expect me to be something I'm not." Their eyes met across the table, and Harrison felt that pull again, that sense of connection he'd felt from the first moment. "Tell me something," Zelda said after a moment. "That night, outside the saloon, why did you stop? Most people would have walked by, minded their own business." Harrison considered the question. "I almost did walk by, but then I thought about all the times I'd felt alone and desperate, and how much it would have meant if someone had stopped to help. I couldn't be the person who walks past someone in pain." Zelda reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm glad you didn't walk by." Harrison turned his hand over and squeezed hers gently. "So am I." The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility. Then Zelda stood to clear the plates, and the spell broke, though the warmth remained. As Harrison prepared to leave a few hours later, full of good food and better conversation, Zelda walked him to the door. "Harrison," she said quietly, "would you come back, tomorrow or whenever you have time? I'd like to see you again, not because I'm grateful, though I am, but because I enjoy your company." Harrison's heart soared. "I'd like that very much. How about tomorrow evening? I could help you sort through the inventory, figure out what you need to restock." "That would be perfect." Harrison left that night feeling lighter than he had in years. As he walked back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, he caught himself whistling. The next weeks fell into a pleasant pattern. Harrison would finish his work at the Henderson Ranch, then head into town to help Zelda at the store. At first, they really did work on restocking and reorganizing. But gradually, the work became an excuse to spend time together. They'd talk while shelving goods, laugh while inventorying stock, and find reasons to stand close to each other. The people of Silverton noticed. It was impossible not to in a town that size. The general consensus was approval. Harrison was well-liked and respected, and Zelda had earned admiration for her determination to save her father's business. Some of the older women started making pointed comments about how nice it would be to see the young people settled. Thomas Henderson noticed too. One evening about a month after the sale, he pulled Harrison aside. "You're sweet on the Zimmerman girl," he said. It wasn't a question. Harrison felt his face heat. I am. Is that a problem? Problem, son, it's about the best news I've heard in a while. You've been working for me 5 years, and in that time, I've watched you save every penny. Never take a day off. Never let yourself have any fun. It's good to see you living a little. I want to court her properly, Harrison admitted, but I don't have much to offer now. That's $60. It was going to be the start of a down payment on land. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. You'll build it back up. And if you're serious about this girl, about building a life with her, well, I've been thinking. This ranch is getting to be more than I can manage on my own. I could use a partner, someone I trust. We could work out an arrangement where you'd earn shares in the operation. It's something to think about. Harrison was stunned. Thomas, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Court the girl, see where it goes. But know that you've got options. You've got a future here. That Saturday evening, Harrison asked Zelda if she'd like to take a walk. They strolled through Silverton as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Harrison gathered his courage. Zelda, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it's been the best part of my days. You're smart and strong and kind, and when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Zelda's eyes were shining. I feel the same way. Harrison, you came into my life at my darkest moment, and you brought light with you. Not just by helping save the store, but by being you, by being patient and good and making me laugh again. Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Then I'd like to court you properly if you'll have me. I know I'm just a ranch hand without much to my name right now, but I'm hardworking and I'll do everything I can to build a good life. Harrison Irons, Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't care what you have or don't have. All I care about is who you are, and who you are is the best man I've ever known. Yes, I'll court you. Nothing would make me happier. Harrison wanted to kiss her right there in the middle of the street, but he held back, aware of the proprieties and the eyes that were surely watching. Instead, he took her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You've made me very happy, he said softly. The next months were among the happiest of Harrison's life. He and Zelda saw each other almost every day. They'd have dinner together, sometimes at her place, sometimes at the hotel restaurant. They'd go on walks, attend church socials, and steal moments alone when they could. Harrison was always respectful, never pushing beyond what was proper, but the tension between them grew as their feelings deepened. Zelda's store flourished. With Harrison's help and advice, she'd restocked smartly and was building a reputation as a fair and honest businesswoman. More importantly, she'd paid back both Harrison and Thomas Henderson within 6 months, though both men had told her to take her time. A debt is a debt, Zelda had said firmly. You both helped me when I had nothing. The least I can do is repay you as quickly as possible. Harrison had taken his $60 and, combined with what he'd saved since, had a nice nest egg building again. But more significantly, he'd accepted Thomas Henderson's partnership offer. He now owned a 10% share in the ranch, with the potential to increase that over time. It meant he had real prospects, a real future to offer. On a warm evening in May 1879, nearly a year after they'd first met, Harrison took Zelda on a buggy ride up into the mountains. He'd packed a picnic and they sat on a blanket overlooking Silverton, the town spread out below them like a toy village. It's beautiful up here, Zelda said, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. You can see everything. Zelda, Harrison said, his heart pounding. This past year has been the best of my life. Every day I wake up thinking about you. Every night I fall asleep grateful that you're in my world. I can't imagine my future without you in it. Zelda turned to look at him, her eyes wide. Harrison, He pulled out a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing extravagant but bought with honest money honestly earned. "Zelda Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks, but she was smiling, laughing. "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger and then, finally, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I love you," Harrison said. "I should have said it before, but I love you." "I love you too," Zelda whispered. "I think I have since that first night when you stopped to help a stranger who was crying." They were married in July 1879 in the small church in Silverton. Thomas Henderson stood up as Harrison's best man, and Sarah Morrison, Zelda's closest friend from the Women's Auxiliary, stood up for her. The whole town turned out for the celebration. Even Mr. Carson from the bank attended, though he looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Harrison and Zelda moved into the apartment above the store, which they'd spent weeks fixing up. It wasn't large, but it was theirs. Their first night as husband and wife, they lay in bed talking until the early hours of the morning, making plans and sharing dreams. "I want children," Zelda said softly. "At least 3. 3 sounds perfect," Harrison agreed, pulling her closer. "We'll fill this place with noise and laughter. And I want to keep running the store, at least for a while. Is that all right? I know some men wouldn't like their wives working." Harrison kissed her forehead. "You're not some woman. You're my wife, my partner. We'll figure out how to make it all work together." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Harrison would rise before dawn to work at the ranch, come home for lunch with Zelda at the store, then return to finish his day. Evenings they'd spend together, either minding the store or in their apartment, just enjoying each other's company. The love between them grew deeper with each passing day. In the spring of 1880, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. Harrison was beside himself with joy, already planning how to expand their living space and ensure Zelda had everything she needed. "I'm going to keep working as long as I can," Zelda insisted. "The store needs me, and I'll go mad sitting around doing nothing." "Just promise me you'll be careful," Harrison said, his hand on her still flat stomach. "No heavy lifting, no long hours on your feet. I promise. Besides, I've already asked Sarah Morrison if she'd be willing to help out part-time. She's looking for work, and I trust her." Their son, Henry, was born in December 1880, a healthy baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Harrison held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overcome with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Zelda. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." Zelda, exhausted but glowing, smiled. "We made him together. He's our miracle." Henry was followed by a daughter, Margaret, in 1882, and then another son, Samuel, in 1884. The apartment above the store became increasingly crowded, and finally, in 1885, Harrison and Zelda made a decision. "Thomas has offered to sell us a parcel of his land," Harrison told Zelda one evening after the children were in bed. 15 acres on the eastern edge of the property. We could build a house there, have room for the children to grow." "What about the store?" Zelda asked. She'd continued to run it successfully, with Sarah Morrison now working full-time as her assistant. "We're only talking about a mile outside of town. You could still manage the store, just not live above it. And Zelda, we need the space. Henry's 6 years old now. He needs room to run, to learn about ranching if he wants." Zelda looked around their cramped apartment and nodded slowly. "You're right. It's time. Let's build our house." They broke ground in the spring of 1885. Harrison did much of the work himself, with help from ranch hands and men from town. It wasn't a mansion, but it was solid and spacious. 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a front porch that faced the mountains. They moved in that autumn, and Zelda cried happy tears as she arranged their furniture in rooms that didn't feel like they were bursting at the seams. Life in the new house was good. Harrison's partnership in the ranch had grown to 25%, and the operation was thriving. Zelda had promoted Sarah Morrison to manager of the store, which allowed her to spend more time at home with the children while still overseeing the business. They'd found a balance that worked for them. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Harrison and Zelda would sit on their front porch and watch the stars emerge over the mountains. These were Harrison's favorite moments when the work was done and it was just the two of them in the peaceful darkness. "Do you ever think about that night?" Zelda asked one such evening. "The night we met." "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about how close I came to just walking into that saloon, to never knowing you existed." "I was so lost that night," Zelda said quietly. "So certain my world was ending. I never imagined that the man who stopped to help me would become my whole world." Harrison took her hand, the same hand he'd held that first night, now wearing his ring. "You saved me too, you know. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions. Working, saving, but never really living. You taught me what it means to truly be alive." "We saved each other," Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That's what love does." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas Henderson passed away in 1890, leaving Harrison a 40% share of the ranch in his will. Harrison was devastated by the loss of his mentor and friend, but he honored Thomas's memory by running the ranch with the same integrity and fairness Thomas had shown him. The children grew. Henry proved to be a natural rancher, following his father around from the time he could walk. Margaret inherited her mother's head for business and often helped at the store. Samuel was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a lawyer or a teacher. In 1892, Zelda surprised Harrison with the news that she was pregnant again at 36. "I thought we were done," she said with a laugh. "Apparently, we have one more in us." Their youngest daughter, Rose, was born in 1893. She was the baby of the family, doted on by everyone, and she grew up fearless and wild, insisting on helping with the cattle alongside her father and older brother. As the new century approached, Harrison and Zelda often marveled at the life they'd built. What had started with tears outside a saloon had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. A thriving ranch, a successful business, 4 healthy children, and a love that had only deepened with time. One evening in the summer of 1899, they attended a dance in Silverton to celebrate the town's silver anniversary. As they moved around the floor, Harrison pulled Zelda close. "You're still the most beautiful woman in the room," he murmured in her ear. Zelda laughed. "You're biased and half blind, but I love you for it. I'm serious. When I look at you, I still see that woman outside the saloon, the one who was so brave and so broken. But I also see the woman you've become, strong and confident and so full of life. You take my breath away." Tears sparkled in Zelda's eyes. "Harrison Irons, after 20 years of marriage, you can still make me cry. Happy tears, I hope. Always happy tears with you." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and neighbors, their children watching from the sidelines, Harrison felt a profound sense of gratitude. His life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned when he was a young man heading west with nothing but dreams and determination. It had turned out better, so much better, all because he'd stopped when he heard someone crying, all because he'd chosen kindness over convenience. That single choice had changed everything. The 20th century brought new changes and challenges. The mining industry in Silverton began to decline as silver prices dropped, but the town adapted, diversifying its economy. The general store remained a cornerstone of the community, now managed by Margaret, who had shown as much business acumen as her mother. Henry had taken over day-to-day operations of the ranch, with Harrison serving as a mentor and advisor. The ranch had expanded significantly over the years, and Harrison's 40% share meant he'd achieved financial security he'd never dreamed possible as a young cowboy. Samuel had indeed pursued education, studying law in Denver and returning to Silverton to open a practice. He was already making a name for himself defending miners and workers who'd been cheated by unscrupulous employers. Rose, the youngest, was still at home at 16, though she spent more time on horseback than was probably proper for a young lady. Zelda had given up trying to make her more conventional, accepting that their youngest daughter had inherited her father's love of the land and wide open spaces. As Harrison and Zelda moved into their 40s and then their 50s, they remained deeply devoted to each other. The passion of their early years had evolved into something even stronger, a partnership built on trust, respect, and unwavering support. In 1905, Margaret married a young schoolteacher named David Foster. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Silverton in attendance. As Harrison walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle, he caught Zelda's eye. She was crying, as he'd known she would be, but she was smiling too. Their first baby was starting her own life. Henry married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property in 1907, and suddenly, there was talk of grandchildren. Harrison found he was ridiculously excited by the prospect. "Grandfather Harrison," Zelda teased him one night. "It has a nice ring to it." "Grandmother Zelda sounds pretty good too," he replied, pulling her into his arms. Even after nearly 30 years of marriage, he still reached for her every night, still found comfort in her presence. The grandchildren came in due course. Margaret and David had 3 children in quick succession. Henry and his wife Louise welcomed twin boys in 1909, sending Harrison into a panic about how to tell them apart. Samuel, after establishing his law practice, married a schoolteacher from Denver, and they added 2 more grandchildren to the mix. Only Rose remained unmarried, stubbornly insisting she wasn't interested in settling down. "I'm only 23, she'd protest when her siblings teased her. "There's time. Don't let them rush you," Zelda would tell her youngest daughter. "Wait for someone who sees you, really sees you, like your father saw me." By 1912, Harrison was 60 years old, Zelda was 56, and they were the proud grandparents of 7 grandchildren with more on the way. The ranch house they'd built nearly 30 years earlier had been expanded twice to accommodate family gatherings, which happened frequently. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family had gathered for a birthday celebration for the twins. The house was chaos, full of children running and laughing, adults talking and catching up. Harrison stood on the porch watching it all, overwhelmed by the life they'd created. Zelda came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "About how none of this would exist if I'd walked into that saloon instead of stopping in that alley," Harrison said. "Every person in that house, every laugh and smile and moment of love, it all started with that one choice. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made a different choice?" Harrison turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. "Never, not once. Every day with you has been exactly where I was supposed to be, even the hard days," Zelda asked. There had been hard days over the years, illnesses, financial worries, the inevitable conflicts that came with building a life together. "Especially the hard days," Harrison said firmly, "because we faced them together. Zelda, you're the best decision I ever made. The best thing that ever happened to me." She kissed him then, a soft, sweet kiss that spoke of decades of love and devotion. From inside the house, someone called for them to cut the cake, and they went in together, hand in hand, to rejoin their family. Rose finally married in 1914, and predictably, she chose a man who was as unconventional as she was. James Tucker was a surveyor who spent half his life in the mountains, mapping the wilderness. They had a small wedding and immediately left for an expedition in Wyoming, much to Zelda's consternation. "I suppose she gets her wandering spirit honestly," Zelda said to Harrison after they'd seen the young couple off. "You came west, seeking something too." "And I found it," Harrison said, wrapping his arms around his wife. "I found everything. The years of World War I were difficult. Samuel's oldest son enlisted despite his father's protests, and the family spent anxious months praying for his safe return. When he came home in 1919, scarred but alive, there wasn't a dry eye at the reunion. As the 1920s dawned, Harrison was approaching 70, and he'd handed over full control of the ranch to Henry years ago. He still rode out most mornings, unable to completely give up the work that had defined so much of his life, but he was content to be an observer more than a participant. Zelda had fully retired from the store, which Margaret ran with impressive skill. But she still kept the books at home, unable to completely let go of the business that had been her father's legacy and her salvation. They were grandparents now to 15 grandchildren, with 2 great-grandchildren already born. The family had spread across Colorado and beyond, but they all came home to Silverton for important occasions, filling the ranch house with multiple generations. On their 40th wedding anniversary in July 1919, their children threw them a party that felt like a tribute to everything they'd built together. People came from all over, some traveling significant distances. Former ranch hands, longtime customers from the store, friends who'd known them since that first desperate week when they'd fought to save Zelda's inheritance. Speech. Someone called as the party wound down and the crowd took up the chant. Harrison, never comfortable with public speaking, stood reluctantly. But when he looked at Zelda, sitting beside him with silver in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes, the words came easily. "40 years ago, I heard someone crying outside a saloon," he began. "I could have walked away. I almost did. But something made me stop, made me offer help to a stranger. That choice changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. It gave me a partner, a best friend, a love that has sustained me through every joy and every challenge. It gave me children and grandchildren, a legacy that extends far beyond any piece of land or any amount of money. Zelda, you took a lonely cowboy and gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to be grateful every single day. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Zelda stood and kissed her husband, a kiss witnessed by the children and grandchildren whose existence was proof of that long-ago kindness. The 1920s brought prosperity and change. Silverton had evolved significantly from the rough mining town Harrison had first encountered in 1873. Indoor plumbing and electricity had arrived. The roads were better. The town had grown and matured, though it retained its frontier character. Harrison and Zelda's relationship had evolved too, though the core remained unchanged. They were old now, moving more slowly, tiring more easily. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered so many seasons. They developed a routine in their retirement. Mornings, Harrison would still ride out to check on the ranch, though usually Henry would insist on going with him, protective of his aging father. Zelda would work in her garden, which had become legendary in Silverton. Afternoons, they'd sit on the porch, reading or just talking. Evenings belonged to family, whether it was visits from children and grandchildren or quiet dinners alone together. "Do you ever miss the early days?" Harrison asked one evening. They were in their 70s now, and the past felt very present. "When it was just us against the world." Zelda considered the question. "I miss being young," she admitted. "I miss having the energy we had then. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. I love our family, our life. Every wrinkle and gray hair was earned building this together." Harrison reached for her hand, as he had countless times over their decades together. "I feel the same way. Though I do sometimes think about that night we met, how young we were, how scared you were. How kind you were," Zelda added. "Harrison, you've given me such a good life." "I never properly thanked you for that." "You don't need to thank me. You gave me a good life too, the best life." In 1925, they celebrated their 46th wedding anniversary. It was a smaller affair than their 40th, just family gathered at the ranch house. But it was perfect in its intimacy, surrounded by the people they loved most. Henry stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who showed me what it means to be a good husband, a good father, a good person. Everything I am, everything we all are, we learned from watching you too. You loved each other through everything, and that love created all of this." He gestured to the room full of family. "We're your legacy, and we're grateful every day." Margaret added her own words. "Mama, Daddy, you taught me that women could be strong and independent, but that accepting help didn't make you weak. You showed me that a good marriage is a partnership, where both people lift each other up. David and I have tried to build what you have, and we're still learning from you." Samuel, ever the eloquent one, spoke about justice and kindness. "Dad, you stopped that night because it was the right thing to do, not because you expected anything in return. That simple act of kindness created ripples that are still spreading. All of us, all of your grandchildren, we exist because you chose compassion over convenience. That's the lesson I try to carry into my work, into my life." Even Rose, their wild child, had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "You let me be who I am instead of trying to make me into something I'm not. You taught me that love means accepting people, truly accepting them. James and I are happy because I learned what real love looks like from watching you." Harrison and Zelda were overcome, holding hands tightly as their children spoke. When it was their turn to respond, Zelda spoke for both of them. "We're the lucky ones," she said simply. "We found each other against all odds and we built something beautiful. You're all our greatest achievement. The store, the ranch, none of that matters compared to this room full of love." As the evening wound down and family members began to head home, Harrison and Zelda stood on their porch watching the stars, as they had so many thousands of times before. "I hope we have many more years," Harrison said quietly. "But if we don't, I want you to know that I have no regrets. None. You made my life complete." "We have more time," Zelda said with confidence. "We have grandchildren to watch grow up, great-grandchildren to meet. We're not done yet." She was right. They had more time, though not as much as either of them would have liked. They saw their family continue to grow, welcomed more great-grandchildren, and watched their descendants build their own lives and loves. Harrison passed away in his sleep in the spring of 1928, 3 months before his 78th birthday. He'd spent the day working in the yard with Zelda, enjoying the warm weather. They'd had dinner, talked about Henry's plans for the ranch, and gone to bed. Zelda woke to find him peaceful beside her, gone. The grief was crushing, but Zelda took comfort in knowing he'd had a good death, peaceful and at home. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Harrison had touched so many lives over his decades in Silverton, and people came to pay their respects to a man who'd been unfailingly kind and fair. Zelda moved in with Henry and Louise after Harrison's death. She couldn't bear to stay in the house they'd built together, not without him. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories about their grandfather, about the night they'd met, about the life they'd built. She passed away quietly in 1933, 77 years old. Her family buried her beside Harrison in the Silverton cemetery, their graves marked with a simple shared headstone that read, "Harrison Irons and Zelda Zimmerman Irons, together forever. Love endures." The family they'd created continued to grow and thrive. The ranch Henry ran expanded over the decades, becoming one of the most successful operations in Colorado. The general store remained in the family for 3 more generations before finally being sold in the 1970s, but it remained a Silverton landmark. But beyond the land and the businesses, Harrison and Zelda's true legacy was the love they'd shown each other and taught their descendants. Their great-great-grandchildren, born decades after both of them were gone, would still hear the story of how a cowboy stopped when he heard a woman crying, how that simple act of kindness had changed both their lives forever, how that kindness had created a family that spanned generations. The story became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It reminded them all of the power of compassion, the importance of helping strangers, the way a single choice could echo through time. On warm summer evenings, when Harrison and Zelda's descendants gathered at the ranch that was still in the family, they'd sit on the porch that he'd built with his own hands, and someone would invariably mention the night it all began. "Imagine if he'd just walked into that saloon," someone would say. "But he didn't," someone else would respond. "He stopped, he helped, and because of that we're all here," and they were there, dozens of them across multiple generations. Ranchers and businesspeople, teachers and lawyers, artists and engineers, all of them carrying forward the legacy of kindness and love that had started with tears outside a saloon and a cowboy who chose to care. Harrison and Zelda's story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that every act of kindness matters, that compassion changes lives, that love built on a foundation of genuine care and mutual respect can endure anything. In Silverton, Colorado, where summer tourists now came to ride the historic narrow-gauge railroad and ski the slopes in winter, old-timers still remembered the Irons family. They remembered Harrison, the cowboy who'd become a respected rancher, and Zelda, the woman who'd saved her father's store and helped build a legacy. But most of all, they remembered the love story. The tale of 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. It was the kind of story that gave people hope, that reminded them love was real and worth fighting for. Years after they'd both passed, the house Harrison and Zelda had built still stood on the edge of what was now a sprawling ranch compound. It had been preserved by the family, maintained as a reminder of where it all began. Inside, photographs lined the walls chronicling their life together from that first year to their final days. There was a photograph from their wedding day, both of them young and radiant with hope. Pictures of each of their children as babies, as growing youngsters, as adults with their own families. Images of Harrison on horseback, of Zelda at the store, of them together on their porch. The last photograph taken of them together showed them in their 70s, sitting on that beloved porch. Harrison's arm was around Zelda's shoulders, her head resting against him. They were both smiling, the kind of smile that came from deep contentment. Their faces were lined with age, marked by decades of hard work and laughter and love, but their eyes still held the same warmth they'd had at the beginning. Visitors to the house, family members bringing their children to see where it all started, would stand in front of that photograph and marvel. That was what love looked like after 50 years. That was what a life well lived looked like. That was what happened when kindness met courage and built something lasting. The story of Harrison and Zelda Irons wasn't just a tale of romance, though it was certainly that. It was a story about character, about the choices we make and the ripples they create. It was about seeing someone in pain and choosing to help instead of walking away. It was about building a life brick by brick, day by day, with someone you trusted and respected and loved with your whole heart. It was, in the end, a story about how one night, one act of compassion, one cowboy stopping when he heard someone crying, changed the course of not just 2 lives but countless lives that came after. It was proof that kindness mattered, that love endured, and that the best legacies were built not on wealth or status but on the relationships we nurture and the love we share. And somewhere in the mountains above Silverton, in the wind that rustled through the aspens and the streams that ran clear and cold from the peaks, the spirits of Harrison and Zelda Irons remained, together as they'd always been, together as they'd always be. Their love story complete, their legacy secure, their lives a testament to the enduring power of one cowboy's quiet kindness, and the woman whose tears led her to the love of her life. The end of their earthly journey was just the beginning of their legend, a story that would be told for generations, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. And that love, true love built on compassion and respect and genuine care, really could last forever.